Hi, I'm Brittany. I am a licensed teacher, but I am staying home right now to homeschool my two littles, and we're going to talk today about reading when your child doesn't want to read. Okay, so I had a question from a viewer who asked what to do when your child doesn't want to read. But they need to, because we know that children need to read. We know that kids need to enjoy books and they need to practice, and especially if you are, whether you're homeschooling on purpose or because the state has shut your child's school down, we all know that your kids, and my kids and all kids need to practice reading. The problem is when you have children who don't like reading. This particular viewer said that her child loves math and she loves all other areas of study except reading. And I get that. When I was working in a classroom, I would see kids go into meltdown mode because they didn't want to read. And that's hard because you can't force a child to read. I mean, you can't, if they're throwing a fit and they're laying on the floor and they're crying, there's no way you can actually make them read. Yes, you can discipline. Yes, you can, you can take things away until they do as they're supposed to. And I am all for, whatever method of parenting works for you to get your child to obey. Every family is different. The good news is, however, there are ways to hopefully prevent everything from reaching that level. You don't want the meltdowns. You don't want your child to hate reading. And there are ways to try to work around that hatred and try to figure out what's going on, why they dislike it so much, and how to make things a little easier, because reading should be fun. Reading should be fun for mom and dad and the kids. So we're going to talk about that today. First of all, we're going to talk about something that I learned about in college, and there are there are more, but we're going to talk about three of the main different kinds of reading. And I promise this has to do with the rest of what we're going to discuss. But and this is my textbook from college that I pulled out just to double check things. I couldn't remember the name of one of them to save my life. But this is Literacy for the 21st Century, A Balanced Approach, 5th edition. I'm sure they're on like the 25th edition by now with the way textbooks come out. But if you can get your hands on a copy of this, even if you're not a licensed teacher, even if you're not studying to be a licensed teacher, this book was amazing. And I'm sure you could find this used somewhere online, but I love this. I will see if maybe I can find this online for you and put that in the comments of the section of, or the description section of the video, because this is an awesome book. But there are three different kinds of reading we're going to talk about today. The first one is called modeled reading. Now, modeled reading is where you read to show children what reading should sound like, what it should look like. You're gonna read topics and levels that are too hard for the children. They don't have to be. You can always model anything, but this is particularly talking about books that your child is not yet ready to read. And honestly, this is how we all start reading. We never pick up our 2-year-old, and you should be reading with your kids from day one, but you never pick up your baby and your 2-year-old and say, okay, child, you're going to sit here and you're going to read this one. Children aren't born knowing how to read. So the whole idea behind modeled reading is you're reading to show them what reading should look like, what it should sound like, to get them interested, to talk about content that they're not ready to read about on their own yet, because maybe they can't read the vocabulary words, they can't read the level that the book is on. So we all start with modeled reading, and we should honestly continue modeled reading way past elementary school. We should be modeling reading up through junior high at least. While kids are still upping their level of comprehension and decoding words. So we all start that way. The individual that had asked the question, her daughter, I believe, is 7 years old. And so my daughter's 5. She just turned 5. And one of the things that I've begun to do with her, and she's an early reader. We're working on like AT words, words that end in AT, words that end in AM. She's just beginning, but she's doing great. I'm so proud because she's worked so hard. But that doesn't mean that I only read books that end in, with words that end with AT to her only. I pulled this out earlier, Cat and Hat. I love this book, but this is not going to be the only book I read to her. I am reading with her one of the books we read because she loves chapter books. I have discovered recently. We read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now, is she ready to read this on her own? Absolutely not. And honestly, she doesn't understand all the concepts in here either. She's too young to. But what we did is we read one chapter at a time, or even part of a chapter at a time, and she would play with Legos or dolls or whatever while she listened to me read. And I would read to her, and we would stop and we would discuss things that she had questions about. And I would stop and I would, again, this goes back to that video, and I'll make sure to link that, but the video on teaching reading comprehension skills without a curriculum. This all goes back to that. You can totally teach reading comprehension before they're even reading, because you're discussing the text and you're breaking it down and you're talking about things that they don't understand. You're also involving them in worlds that they're not ready to reach on their own yet. It's like you're giving them a ladder and saying, climb up this ladder. You can peek over the wall into Narnia. My daughter loves Narnia. She absolutely loves it, which just, it makes me giddy and gives me shivers. But because I have been reading this with her, and she's also been listening to the audiobook that we got from the library, she's not only been introduced to Narnia, she's seeing what wonderful world she can discover by reading. So that is going to give her a greater desire to practice reading and to learn reading, because she knows that when she keeps reading, she can discover things like this. So first of all, if your child does not want to read, or if your child does, read things that are above their level, and things that you can discuss. Now, we're obviously not going to be reading yet. We're not going to be reading highly political books yet. We're not going to be reading highly philosophical books that, what is that, Sophie's World, I think my mom got me when I was younger. She's not ready for that. I'm not saying introduce them to concepts that they're not mature enough for yet, but books like this that are fantasy, and this is an absolutely clean book as far as there aren't any dirty words, there's no inappropriate adult mature scenes, absolutely safe. But if you read them books that they are not ready to read on their own yet, but you sit and discuss the content with them, this is going to give them the understanding that reading opens up worlds and it opens up doors, and they're listening to what good reading sounds like. They're hearing your inflection, they're hearing new vocabulary, and you can actually stop and discuss that vocabulary. And my daughter often would ask me, what does that word mean? And so we'd stop and discuss it. And it's best because we're discussing it in context. I didn't hand her a list of vocab words at age 5 and say, here, figure these out, memorize these. We're discussing them in context. We just finished, the Boxcar Children, which I can't reach it, but the Boxcar Children. We did Stuart Little. We're currently in Little House in the Big Woods. So, the more you can introduce your child to books that really broaden their horizons, the better. So that is modeled reading. You are reading for them in a way that they're not ready for yet, but you're getting them ready. You're showing them what they can read, how they can read in the future. And it helps them with things like tone and inflection and vocabulary and how to pronounce things that they're not ready for, but you're preparing them. And again, I always go back to this. Everything in education is exposure, exposure, exposure. The brain takes things in, and while it may not be ready to spit them back out, it doesn't just kick them out. It shouldn't. I mean, we're not talking about disabilities here, but in general, children, when they take things in, it's going to sit there and it's going to stew. And the more they're exposed to it, the more they're going to be able to start producing that kind of thing. Okay, so interactive then is the next one. Now this is the kind of reading that, for example, a teacher would do in a classroom when she is reading a book with children. So for younger children, interactive reading would be where she takes the big book and puts it up on the board, and they have the big letters that are easier to read, and you read them all together. And interactive reading is usually done on a level that's just slightly above the student's level. So that you are stretching them. It's kind of like when you are teaching a child to kick a soccer ball, and they can't kick a soccer ball well yet, but you are standing there with them and you're practicing and you're showing it, and they're practicing again and again. So you're stretching them, and interactive reading does that. It basically is, it's you teaching them to step up to the next level, but you're not saying, here, read this hard book. You're saying, okay, I'm going to come alongside you and we're going to do this together. And I mean, that doesn't have to be high-level books. Let's see. Green Eggs and Ham. I was tutoring once, and this was our main book that we stuck with, and I told her, I'd bought a used copy, and I told the little girl, she was 5, I said, if you read this book by yourself, one day, all by yourself, you get to keep it. And so we went through, and I can't tell you how many times we went through this book. And, you know, I am Sam. Those are very basic words, very basic words. They're some of the first words children will learn, not Sam, but Sam is something that's easy to decode, S-A-M. It's called a CVC word, which is consonant, vowel, consonant. That's the first type of book word children learn to decode. And so we went through this book over and over again. And at the beginning, she wasn't ready to do it herself. But as we continued to go through the book together on repeat, she did eventually move to that level. So yes, you could do something like this. As kids get older, a lot of times what teachers do is they will do what's called popcorn reading, which is where the class will read a novel together. And say, for example, they were reading, let me find one. Hold on. I've got a lot of really funny ones over here. Okay. Say they were reading Mrs. Pickle Wiggle, which is a really funny book. You know, they're reading it all together, and the teacher might read the first 2 paragraphs or the first 3 paragraphs, and then she will do what's called popcorn reading, where she will randomly pick a child in the room and say, okay, I want you to read this now. Read the next paragraph, and then the next paragraph is read by someone else. And if the children have a question or they stumble, the teacher's there to help. So that's something you can do with your children too, whether it's this level or this level or, this level. You can read it together, and that way the child doesn't feel like the spotlight's on them. A great way to do this is by you starting to read. So you as the parent are the first ones to read to them. You are the one who gets things up. You warm them up. They don't feel like they're right on the spot immediately. And you can even share the reading. So instead of saying, okay, you read the next page, you can start with, so would. Would is a hard word. Would you eat them in... And then you pause, and when you point, they know that that's their letter. They would say A, you'd finish box. Would you eat them with? They would say A, and you would finish fox. So you don't have to read, you don't have to do everything all at once. You don't have to just give it to them and say, you read for 5 minutes all on your own. No, you can totally do this together. And that will often when kids don't like to read, it's because it's hard and they don't understand it. I think really a lot of people who don't like to read, it's because they struggle with it. And so, because we all like movies. Movies are stories, right? And books essentially, fiction books are stories. And so I think a lot of kids, they never learn the magic of where reading can take them. So when we sit there and we do this together and we don't, make children feel stupid because they can't read it, that's a great way to start. Another thing that a teacher of mine, a teacher that I did my student teaching with did, is she had these little strips. Now you can buy them, they're expensive. I bought the tape. It's like a roll of tape that's plastic and it's sticky, but it comes off. And so she would cut it to cover a word. And so for example, if I covered the word them, you would read together, I do not like, and then she might say, okay, what do you think is the next word? And then we would discuss in context, using context, does this make sense? Using the pictures, does it look like it goes there? So they might guess the word, and then you peel it off and you say, does this look right? And you would see if they guessed the word right. And it's harder to go through a whole book like that if it's a longer book, but you can take, 1 or 2 pages at a time. And do that. So, you can take picture walks together, and I've talked about this in books before. Before you even start reading the book, go through and look at the pictures and have the child tell you what they think is going on. And there's really no wrong way to do this. If they are making predictions, it's just a prediction. You don't get upset because they got it wrong. Now, if they're being smart alecky and sarcastic, you may need to address that as an obedience issue. But as far as just taking guesses, that's all they're doing. They can't get it wrong. And when children find some confidence in that they're doing something right, it makes them usually a little less hesitant to keep going. So start with a picture walk, have them make predictions, and then see if they're right. The Don't tell them, oh, good, you got it. You know, you say, okay, let's see. So they're not immediately getting that feedback of, oh, you did this wrong. Then after the book is done, you know, you can go through and discuss it. Hey, did we get these right? Did we get this wrong? What did we get right? Let's go back and look. Another piece of advice I would give you whenever you're reading interactively is if you're reading something that you know they're going to have a harder time with. Now, you can't do this really with chapter books, but when you're doing a smaller children's book like this, read it first. Read it for them first so they've heard it before and they know how it sounds. What I might do with my daughter is when she gets a new Bob book, and I've talked about Bob books before. I actually, if you go to my website, I have resource links, they are affiliate links, but affiliate links, all it is it's a link to, in this case, Amazon, where you're not charged any extra, but if you purchased it using my link, you get, I get a little bit of money. Again, it doesn't charge you anything extra. It's just a way for me to recommend items to you that I fully recommend, that I can fully throw my weight behind, and so you know that you're not getting something that's just junky. I'm really picky about what I put up there. Anyways, back to this. So I have this on there, the Bob Books set 1 on there. They have more sets. I just have set 1 there because that's what I'm doing right now with my daughter. So I would go through when she gets to Willie's Wish, which is set number 1, book number 6. We're not there yet. I would go through and I would actually read the book to her first. And when I read, I'm not going to read as fast as I would for an adult. I'm not going to read the way I would read a newspaper or a novel. I would start out, Mama, and pointing is so important. I know it's old-fashioned, but make your child point to the words. Mama, Papa, and Willie went to a wishing well. Yeah, the inflection's going to be a bit weird because you're reading slowly. But you're really modeling, and you're making sure that you're not mumbling the words, so that your child can hear you clearly. They can hear the words. You go through and you read the whole book to your child alone. Depending on how your child is doing, you may call it a day after that. If your child is one that can sit there a little longer, you go back and you start again and you say, okay, you know what? Let's try the first page. Okay, let's try the first page. And then you have your child use their pointy finger. And this is something to train them in everything. Everything they read when they're lower level, make them point at it. Mama, Papa, and you don't just say you read it now, you read it with them. You read it in tandem. Now I will say, if you pick up a book, for example, if I picked this one up right now, my daughter would have no idea what she was reading because she's not here yet. A lot of kids will hate reading because they're not ready for that level. So if I started this page and the child missed Mama, Papa, they got the word and, they missed Willie, got went, got to, and then A, and then missed wishing well. They just missed like 6 or 7 words on a page with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 words. That means they're not ready. You need to go back a level, maybe back a few levels. If your child misses more than 3 words on a page, I would say they're probably not ready. You probably need to go back to the level before and work on that again. And that can be the case for any of these books. You know, if some children aren't ready for Sam I Am, that's some of these words are hard. So if your child is stumbling a lot and that's seeming to frustrate them, they're probably not ready, and it's not going to do anyone any favors by making them memorize all the words. Like wood is W-O-U-L-D. I can't spell today. That's a hard word. And so, of course, children have to memorize words, but if they're not ready, making them just memorize all the words and not realizing they don't have the phonics behind it, it's not going to help anybody. You need to probably go back a level, scale back. If they're not ready for green eggs and ham, they might be ready for the Cat in the Hat. If they're not ready for that, they might need to go back to the beginning of the Bob books. But forcing a child to read something they're not ready for is a recipe for disaster, because it's going to frustrate them and they're going to think they're stupid and they're not going to want to do it. I mean, I took calculus in college. It was flipping hard. If you sat me down and gave me calculus 3 homework and said, do this, I would be like, nope, not touching it. I don't know what I'm doing. This is stupid. Why am I doing this? I know I can't get it right. And so when we have children read things that are too hard for them, that's what they feel like. So, you know, just something huge is saying, are they missing lots of words on this page? If so, they're probably not ready for the book. Okay, and then the other level, and we might go back to interactive because interactive is the one you're probably going to spend the most time in, independent. Independent reading is when a child is on their level, they are able to read it by themselves. They don't need help decoding the words, or most of them. They might need help with a view, but most of them they don't need help with lots of comprehension. They can understand most of it on their own. That's the level that we want to get them to. We want them independently reading. We want them reading on their own. And by reading on their own, I don't mean just sitting there looking at the pictures. That's great, that's independent, but that doesn't count as actual reading. Independent reading is they can sit down and read the story for themselves. And that's what we want. We want to up their independent level reading. But you have to work with the other two to get to that point. And so if a child really, really is struggling with independent reading, we probably need to go back and do more guided reading and more modeled reading. I'm not saying quit the independent reading altogether, but a child cannot independently read if they're not comfortable with the language, if they're not comfortable with the words, if they can't decode. To decode the word means to sound it out, to figure it out using the different letters. And we will have I'm going to do a video on sight words and phonics because you need both. Don't let anyone tell you that one or the other is rubbish because you need them both. But yeah, if they're not ready to independently read, that's okay. The thing with reading is to just keep trying and to try to make it fun. If they're struggling with independent reading and they're struggling with interactive reading, don't stop modeling that reading. Don't stop. You can model the next level up. You can model the level that you thought they were on. And we should be doing all three. We should be doing all of these as our children learn to read. Now, like I said at the beginning, kids can't independently read. It's just not possible. But once they do start reading, we should be doing all of these. And yeah, it's a lot. One of the things that has made reading a little less time consuming for us, and I'm not saying at all that I want to not read with my child. I do, we read every day. But something to help children enjoy and to work on that modeled reading is to give them audiobooks. Now, I will post the link. Right now, Audible has a bunch of audiobooks for free that you can stream online, and it's great. This morning, my child was listening to Beatrix Potter books and The Secret Garden. In fact, she's listening to it right now on her Kindle. She's not allowed to play on her Kindle, but she can listen to things. So yeah, that's fantastic. You can do that. Books on tape, the old cassette tapes we used to have in elementary school when we were little, that were at the library, that were in the big plastic bag, and there was the cassette tape and the book with it. Libraries still have those on CD, and I bought a bunch of those for $1 each at a library used book sale, and it was great. We listened to those in the car. My daughter has a CD player. And yeah, one of our friends was teasing me that I'm from the last century. But I like CD players because she can't get on the internet, and she knows how to change the CDs out. She knows how to play. It's great. So yeah, I don't pass up those CDs. If you have a CD player in the house, that's a great way to get kids to read. And so again, they're still hearing, and because it's a professional book reader, they're going to hear that inflection. They're going to hear the book without hearing, people stumbling over the words. They're going to hear that. And once again, it's just going to reinforce, because they need to know these come from books. It's going to reinforce that books can take you so many places. We need to make sure that kids love reading. Let's see. One of the books, if you have a child who struggles with reading or struggles with anything, one of my favorite books of all time is called Thank You Mr Volker, and it's by Patricia Polacco. And again, I will try to put all of these books, their links in the description, so you can pick them up if you want them. But these, or at least a link to the links. But this is a fantastic book, and it's actually somewhat of an autobiography for Patricia Polacco about how she struggled with reading. And while modern educators don't call it dyslexia anymore, if you know what dyslexia is, that's what she had. She had a developmental delay for reading. And it's amazing because the woman is an incredible artist, and she writes her own books. She's written so many books. And she had one teacher who figured it out when she was little that she couldn't read. Even though she had tricked everyone into thinking she couldn't read. And so it's her story. She was bullied, she couldn't read, and it's one story. It just makes me tear up actually reading this book every time. But I love this book. So if your child, it doesn't matter if they struggle, they should read this book. But especially if they struggle with reading or any other issue, Thank You Mr Volker is amazing. Let's see. Okay, so other ways to get our children interested in reading is, again, just finding different, especially finding subjects that kids like. If I sat my daughter down and read her, what's a book she probably wouldn't like? She has a pretty wide range of books she likes. She's interested in animals and science. She loves science. I think of one she wouldn't actually like because she likes almost everything. Let's see. I don't know. We'll go with ones that she does. So if your child doesn't like reading, say they just don't like reading regular stories. My son is not a huge fiction reader. He's finally getting into it, but he's a nonfiction kid. So he and I read books that we look at books that they're not ready to read yet. Where is that one? Okay, here it is. My daughter loves rocks. She loves rocks. Since one of our most recent homeschooling science unit has been on rocks. So we got her this for Christmas. Actually, my aunt did. She obviously cannot read all these words, but I can read it with her. I can go through it with her. We can read, the different, maybe not the whole thing because that's a little too much text for her still. But if we read these smaller little bits, she's still learning. She's still getting information. She's still getting knowledge. No, she's not ready for this to read on her own, but she's learning, and she's learning to love books. So if your kid loves a certain science, subject, that's a great way to go. I feel so old. When I was babysitting, I had a little boy. He's in the Air Force Academy now. Again, I feel really old. When I was babysitting, he was 3, and he wanted me to read him the Encyclopedia of Aeronautics. The book was written for kids that are like 12, and he was 3, and that was his bedtime story. He wanted me to read this thing. So I read it, because if your child wants you to read them something that's not going to hurt them, that's probably a good idea to do. My daughter likes the 5-minute snuggle stories, because they're extra little peeks into the lives of her favorite characters. The Lightlings by R.C. Sproul. This is a fantastic book that helps. R.C. Sproul wrote a ton of kids' books that kind of help children understand theological, Christian theology using pictures, using heavy allegory. And this is one of her favorite books that helps her not to be afraid of the dark. Who pooped? My mom bought this for my daughter. We went to Death Valley. It's a book about Death Valley and using tracks and animal scat to figure out what animals are in the desert. My daughter loves this book. It's a book about poop, but it is educational and she loves it, so therefore we read it. I just read this book to her, Complete Fantasy. It's basically a retelling of The Elves and the Shoemaker, but with an elephant who wants to go to Paris and little mice who become her friends. It's a cute book. Not really that intellectually stimulating, but it's a cute book. It's got some, cute little morals, and we discussed it. My daughter loves these. Can You See What I See? And then there are Seymour Simon books as well, which are those, or the I Spy books where you have to look for all sorts, like the list of things in here. This isn't technically reading, but it's getting her into books. And this is another thing you can do with your children that really can help you reach them as far as teaching them to love books. They're holding the book, they feel like they're reading. Great books. So again, if your child struggles with reading, try to find a book that they like, even if it's not the most intellectually stimulating. My gosh, my brothers and now my daughter were obsessed with Captain Underpants. Now actually Captain Underpants has some high-level humor, but it is Captain Underpants, and like the big bad battle of the bionic boogers part 2. But it kept my brothers reading, and my daughter loves it, so therefore we read it. Now, I'm not saying let your kid read anything. If it's something you object to morally, or you think we really just don't need to be discussing this, say no, you got to figure out what works for your family. But if you can find something, my brothers also like the Garfield comic books. It gets them into a book. These are the easy read books. This one's been loved to death, but my daughter loves these. Again, not super intellectually stimulating, but it's getting her into a book. You can do all sorts of things. One last thing that I would talk about is kids will usually pick 1 or 2 books that they are obsessed with, especially when they're younger, and they want you to read it to them 10,000 times. Don't be afraid to read it to them 10,000 times. Yes, broaden their horizons. Yes, bring them new books. They need to be constantly introduced to new books. But children will usually have a favorite to the point where they memorize it. My son is obsessed with Chicka Chicka Boom Boom and Chicka Chicka 1 2 3. And I literally have Chicka Chicka Boom Boom memorized, the entire book. But so does he. My child cannot read. He's learning his letters. He knows A and O, and I found the other day, he can, if given 2 letters, he can usually identify the correct one almost every single time, which I was like, wow, when did that happen? But he loves those books, and what I will do is I will be reading Chicka Chicka 1 2 3. Will there be a place for? And I'll pause, and he'll go, me. It's really cute. And so, yeah, and he'll sit there and he'll turn the pages and he'll look at it, and no, he's technically not reading, but that's pre-reading. He is getting ready. We are setting the stage for reading. He is learning how things sound. Oh, it just got really cloudy. He's learning how text is supposed to sound, how text is supposed to feel when he says it out loud, and he's learning that the words have meaning. The written words match the words we speak. So if you can find a book that your kid memorizes, they think they're reading, you let them think that they're reading. You don't tell them otherwise. You don't say, actually, honey, you've memorized the book, you don't actually read it. No, do not tell them that. You need to congratulate them and encourage it, because one of these days they'll figure out what the words are. Again, this is a great thing to go through with them then and read it with them and point to each word as they say it, because they're going to start to make those connections. All right, this has been a really long video. I didn't expect it to be this long, but I hope this is helpful for helping your children learn to love reading. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. You can email me. You can go to my website. I'm setting them up right now, but by the time you get this, hopefully it'll be up. Free goodies that if you sign up to my newsletter, you'll get download links for things like a printable hundreds chart, basically printables that you don't need a curriculum for. You can just use them for all sorts of things. We're going to be discussing in the future, I actually wrote a planner for homeschoolers that I will probably be putting up. We'll see. I have to figure out if I can do this. I'm learning InDesign. I'm learning it, but I might be putting up some of the printables for free. Again, if you join my email list, it might be easier just to order the thing. It's like $15. I made it pretty cheap. We're going to be discussing that and why I made it a certain way and how to use the printables, and how to plan properly. We are going to be discussing how to use pennies to teach place value and base 10. And we are going to be talking about all sorts of other fun things, again, that you don't need a curriculum for, especially if you're homeschooling on the fly by surprise. But even if you're homeschooling on purpose, these are, still things you can use and should use, because you probably don't have an extra $300 for a curriculum right now, and that's okay. All right, I will talk to you later. Like this video if it was helpful, and go ahead and subscribe so you make sure you get all of my updates, and I will talk to you later. All right, read on.